It's great to be back in this building, and it's fabulous to see so many of you here. It's just incredible. And on the night of our annual Pictures of the Year show, I always feel such gratitude for the support we receive from our print and digital audience. Thank you for your interest in the photography and videography we work hard each year to produce. Thank you so much for being here. Tonight, as we prepare to look at a collection of our best photos and videos and hear from our speakers, I think it's important to reflect on the opportunities that are all around us. Visual storytelling is something that those of us in the photo department are obviously very passionate about. We strive to publish compelling images that cover breaking news, the story of a big game and the athletes on the team, what's hot in the arts and the restaurant scene about town, and everyday people in our Seattle area communities that we'd like for you to get to know. We aim to take our audience places they haven't been, or at least show you a side of something that maybe you've never seen before. It doesn't always come together seamlessly. Being a visual journalist is not for the faint of heart. Our photographers have a lot of adventures, some more challenging than others, along the way. Thousands, maybe millions of photos cross our photo desk each year that include an array of emotions and settings as our photographers cover a lot of territory with a very wide range of subjects. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a lot of communications with photographer Steve RINGMAN, who will be speaking tonight. We were a bit thinly staffed that week, so Steve and the few other photographers on duty had a full plate of requests. And there was a snowstorm that week. I sent Steve to cover snow in the city, snow on the east side, snow 2 counties up north. I edited a food shoot that he had done just a few days before of a delicious-looking Vietnamese Lunar New Year dish. I also sent him to Olympia for a gun rally and to Georgetown for a Project Homeless story. Oh, in the same week, he covered an event that included Microsoft executives. He photographed a house interior for a Pacific Magazine Northwest Living feature. And he visited a dairy farm in Stanwood. It seemed like he was everywhere, and that's probably because he was everywhere. All in a week's work, as they say. And then there's photographer Mike Siegel, who covered the recent Seahawks-Packers game in Green Bay. There was supposed to be a lot of snow there that weekend, but there wasn't as much as originally forecast. On the way home from Green Bay, Mike's plane departed from Milwaukee 2.5 hours late, and then it only flew to Spokane because the flight crew by then had run out of their legal limit of hours for the day. Mike waited for the plane to be de-iced and the new crew to arrive before they could be flown to Seattle. He grabbed the last of his bags off the luggage carousel at SeaTac Airport at 1:45 a.m. and got home in the wee hours of the morning around 2:45. Just 29 hours later, Mike and I were on the phone together early one morning, sorting out, it was during the snow, and we were sorting out whether he should head towards Skykomish. Highway 2 had been closed due to fallen trees and poor road conditions, and residents of the area couldn't get out for basic supplies. Mike was in contact with the Department of Transportation, trying to figure out if he could tag along with a crew that was taking a truckload of supplies into the affected area. He didn't get on the truck, but later was given permission to drive up the closed highway in his Subaru to take some photos for our story. He shot for a while, and then as the wind started to pick up and it started to snow again, one of his subjects there looked at him and said, "You know, you need to go now while you can still get down that road before trees start snapping and falling again." Mike and I were on the phone a short time later talking about this situation, and I said, go while the going is good. So Mike started down the road, and as he returned, we both thought about how the blizzard conditions he encountered on the way back are what was supposed to happen in Green Bay, not here. Sometimes this job is full of surprises, all in a week's work, as they say. You never know what the week will bring. And then there are days filled with press conferences and searches for feature photos and attempts to make something visual out of a not-so-visual and very challenging assignment. While I use Steve and Mike as recent examples, each one of our photo and video journalists does it all, going to both ends of the spectrum with professionalism and pride in bringing you, our readers, their window on the world around us. We are dedicated to providing an accurate and visually compelling report as we document the stories of the day and seek out slices of life to bring you along the way. I hope you enjoy our Pictures of the Year slideshow. After that, we'll hear from our speakers, and there will be time for a question and answer session at the end of the evening. Thank you. Steve RINGMAN has been a photographer at the Seattle Times since 1991. His passion for telling stories involving environmental issues has taken him around the world. Steve has tackled assignments including documenting the science and ecosystem before and after the removal of the Elwha dams with reporter Linda Mapes. In 2013, Steve worked with reporter Craig Welch on a Pulitzer Center-supported project on ocean acidification. The team traversed the world's greatest oceans, moving from a research expedition in Papua New Guinea to a crab boat on the Bering Sea and a stilt village in Indonesia to explain one of the planet's greatest environmental threats. Most recently, Steve has done in-depth reporting with Linda Mapes on southern resident orca whales for a project called Hostile Waters, Orcas in Peril. Steve has twice been named Newspaper Photographer of the Year by the National Press Photographers Association. A native of Washington, he lives with his wife Evelyn in Seattle. Steve Ringman.
Thank you, Angie. She's my boss. And I have to talk fast tonight because she sent me an email earlier that said I had to shoot a couple assignments later on tonight. So good evening. I'm here tonight to talk about the environmental project, Hostile Waters. Can we lower the lights so you don't have to stare at me, look at the photos? So the environmental project, Hostile Waters, a Seattle Times series which tells the story of our resident endangered killer whales who frequent the Puget Sound. Only 73 southern resident orcas remain. But first, I'm going to bring your attention to the Seattle Times, which has been focused on environmental reporting and the fallout of our changing climate for a while now. I'm going to click through 3 past projects that I worked on, including climate change in Alaska, the Elwha Dam deconstruction, and acidification in our oceans. We live in an amazing part of the world, and many readers have a keen and often passionate sense of belonging, honed by the rugged landscapes that include deserts to the east, the North Cascades, the Salish Sea, and the coastlines along the Pacific Ocean. Our beautiful surroundings help make the Pacific Northwest a stronghold of our environmental movement. So this is the Sunday page that launched the series on the Elwha dams that came down. And just to give you a sense of what it's like to be a photojournalist, I was working the day before this Sunday, and my picture editor, Fred, said, you know, there's a hole waiting for you on the Sunday paper, and you have to fill it. And this is important because this is the launch of the series. And I remember being out there with my buddy John Gussman, who's a filmmaker in PA, and we were trying to make it to the dam, and you can see in the upper left-hand corner there's a piece of machinery, and it's hitting the top of the dam, starting to take it out. It's going chink, 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 and we can hear it through the forest. And I'm going, in the back of my mind, it's just, there's the hole waiting. I've got to fill this hole. And so he and I went bushwhacking through the forest because the Park Service had blocked it all off with fencing. And we jumped below the fence, and I went out on this outcropping right where it faces the dam. And John wouldn't go with me because there were so many people around. He didn't want to get busted. So I went out there and pretended to be a tripod and went click, 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 click as it was going chink, 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 chink. And then we ran back to the car and tried to find cell service and transmitted this photo, and we made deadline. Yeah. Thank God. The Pacific Northwest is also a place that harbors some of the worst traffic in the nation, and like all of our planet, is undergoing significant climate change and rising carbon dioxide levels that are causing acidification. We have a mandate to report on the environment, and our stories often bring strong responses from our loyal readers. When you look back over the recent decades, from the Seattle Times coverage of the Exxon Valdez spill to the removal of the Elwha dams, to the plight of the orca and climate change in Alaska, environmental reporting has been a strong component of the newspaper's mission. So this, I mean, there's a story on every photo, but I'm going to just say a few. This is a pteropod, and it's the size of a lintel, so it's about, it's tiny. And I remember this was one of the focuses we had on the acidification project because it has a shell, it stays in the water column off the ocean, so I had to photograph this crazy little thing in a petri dish, and I remember setting up a little studio at NOAA and chasing it around because it's got a foot that goes like this, and it goes all around the petri dish, and I'm always trying to just. It was not easy, but it was fun. It was fun to try. It's challenging to get. It's fun to do challenging things. I had to learn to scuba dive when we did the acidification portion in Papua New Guinea, and I remember wanting to photograph some of the people who went out fishing, and Craig Welch and I, we went off the dive boat and went over to where these guys were in their dugout canoes, and I remember putting my hands over the edge, and they said, well, through the interpreter, they said that they're going to stab these fish, but they'll bring them up really fast, because when they start bleeding, the sharks will come. And I remember turning to Craig, and Craig's eyes were wide open, and he said my eyes were wide open. But, we completed it and moved on with our lives. So now back now in Washington, this is the beginning of the Hostile Waters Project, which began with the reporting, it began with the reporting of the journey of a totem pole that was made by Lummi Nation carvers seeking to bring Tokatai, a captive killer whale from Miami Aquarium, back to her home waters of Washington State. Out on the Salish Sea, we had help in Friday Harbor from Ken Balcom, who's just a terrific guy, and he's spent his entire career studying whales. He's from the Center for Whale Research, and he's the one that first started to photograph whales, and he built up a huge library, which then turned into the naming process because he identified the markings on their backs and the scratches and then their dorsal fins. So he was the first one that introduced Linda Mapes and I to the whales, except the first ones that we photographed were transients, and I remember Freddie going, well, we can't use those. We're doing the southern residents. And so we did know that sticking with the science, people that are doing the science on the whales was the only way to be around close up, tight and close up to the whales, because they get to be much closer than whale watching boats. So we worked with someone named Deborah Giles, who is with the University UW. She's a researcher, and she studies orca poop. But it's fascinating what she does. She will take her boat and she'll go back and forth behind the pods, and they have a dog that sniffs out the poop with a trainer, and when the dog turns its head, the trainer goes that way, and then the boat goes that way, and then lo and behold, there's the poop. But she then uses it, analyzes it. So this is the photo that was shot in the summer of 2018 of the mother orca named Tahlequah, who carried her dead calf for over 1,000 miles, over 17 days, capturing worldwide attention. And Linda wrote about this, about Tahlequah every day. This is one of those must-get situations that photographers get into. I had to get this photo. This was the 8th day, and Tahlequah had been spotted north of Orcas, hunting at the Canadian border. So Linda and I went out on a 16-foot inflatable, and we bounced around all day looking for her. We finally spotted her at the very end of the day. You can tell it's the end of the day by the warm light, and that the light is disappearing very quickly. I could never really see her dead calf. She was pushing it along in the very beginning in front of her, but at this point she was now holding the calf in her mouth and dragging it alongside her body. And photographing orcas is just not that easy. They'll go down for a couple of minutes, they'll be feeding, hunting, and then they'll come up, and just on the rise is when you want to shoot. And you can never really tell where they're going to come up, but on the rise is where you photograph them. But in the end, I shot only 2 frames, still not knowing if I'd gotten the image of her with her calf. And then as we're going back, as it was getting dark, I was chimping, looking at the back of my camera, and I saw that I had gotten a picture of her with her calf, and it turned out to be a very sad photo. Off to British Columbia, we traveled to see why the northern orcas were doing so much better than the southern orcas, interviewing Paul Spong, who founded Orca Lab, a small research lab on the Hansen Island on the Inside Passage. Paul was one of the pioneers who insisted that the name be changed to orca from killer whales, to better reflect the nature of these animals. In Canada, we found pristine waters and a whale sanctuary in a quieter, undeveloped region. So this is the sanctuary, and for such a long stretch of the shoreline, you cannot go there with a boat, or you can't hike in there and be anywhere near where the whales come right up to the shore, and they have these pebble beaches there, and they spin upside down, and they swim right along the shore. Paul Spong has cameras set up, so he can watch that, and it's unbelievable to see it. So we traveled to California and visited the Sacramento River's winter Chinook run to find out why it had declined precipitously, and wanted to examine how it related to the future of the Puget Sound and its fish population. We found miles and miles and miles of almond orchards, and every almond takes a gallon of water to produce, along with development in the Bay Area and the Shasta Dam, which blocks fish passage for hundreds of miles of rivers and streams. It's to the point where Fish and Wildlife is just trying to keep the run alive, which is now down to about 500. The series also investigated how human noise interferes with the orca's ability to find fish, including recreational boats, ferries, and these tankers. These ships mask the echolocation abilities which orcas use to hunt. And I use a lot of different types of equipment when I'll do an environmental project. I love using stuff, but a drone has become a real major part of my quiver, because the perspective you can get from using a drone is something else. But Ramon is going to talk about some of the problems we had that day with the drone. Linda and I spent time off the Oregon-Washington coast on a NOAA survey boat. This is our coast. It's so beautiful. We went there to witness the changes in the sea creatures from the warming coastal waters. These are pyrosomes, which is a warm water species that kept turning up in their nets along with wolf eels. I was able to build a temporary studio on board the NOAA ship and photograph samples of these creatures that were uncharacteristically migrating up the coast. Closer to home, we reported on the Howard Hansen Dam, which supplies Tacoma's water, and how it blocks fish passage on the Green River. We also looked downstream in the Kent Industrial Valley and saw just how challenging fish passage can be. And finally to the lower Duwamish, emptying into the Elliott Bay. Another big challenge are sea lions. They are eating more and more salmon that resident orcas need to survive. These are California sea lions. And I'd heard that they were up on the Nisqually picking off chum salmon that were making their way up to spawn. This has got to be my favorite photo that I shot for the series, and I think after hearing that the sea lions were up there, I went into the office, and we had just received a shipment of new sports lenses, 2 to 400s, a couple 600s, and I remember going, oh my God, this is perfect timing. I pulled out this 600, brand new, it's an F4, $12,000 lens. It smelled just like the inside of a brand new car. And I'm just like, oh, okay, I'll use this. But when I went up to the river and I'm sitting on the edge, I can see the sea lions going upriver, and all you see is their nose and their eyeballs. It's like Flight of the Valkyries. They're going up, 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 up. And I'm going, damn, everything's going to happen underwater. So here I'm with this big lens. But lo and behold, they would grab a salmon underwater, then they'd come up and they'd thrash, and then they'd go back down again. And luckily, I was pre-focused in the right spot. And believe me, luck plays a huge part of photography. I think some photographers can anticipate luck, but anyway, this was a total lucky shot. But when I took it back and looked at it on the computer, and this is total geek speak, I saw the bubbles, and I could actually see the roundness of the bubbles on his back, and I was like, oh man, this lens is sharp. So I texted Dino, who's going to be up here later. I said, Dino, I just broke in your 600, your sports lens, and I've never used it since then. So on a positive note, we also witnessed a day-old herring spawn, Linda and I did, on the Hood Canal. Their eggs clinging to kelp, and the subsequent hatch and migration into the Strait of Juan de Fuca. It was a pretty cool sight, and a signal that our water quality can still sustain important sea life. That's me swimming with my GoPro on the end of a monopod, and that's Linda behind me, and we're doing our journalism thing, swimming with the fishes and getting paid to tell good stories that hopefully live up to the words of one of my former editors, Alex McLeod, who said, think, use your brain, think about what good the story is, and what good is it doing for our readers. I feel fortunate to be able to visually document our changing environment here in the Pacific Northwest and to help codify the challenges and jumpstart the discussion for a sustainable future. And I want to, anyway, thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Ramon DOMPOR, who's a veteran video journalist for the Seattle Times, who I shared many rock and roll boating experiences with while covering hostile waters. Ramon.
Hi, so my name's Ramon. I'm a video journalist. I don't know why Steve introduces me as a veteran. I've been working at the Times for a little over 2 years. I worked with Steve and Linda Mapes on the Hostile Waters project, and it was an incredible opportunity to be able to film the southern residents. I've talked to a lot of longtime residents of the Puget Sound and heard that many people have never even seen an orca in their life in all their years living here. And for me, on several occasions over the past year and a half, I was within an arm's reach of these enormous animals floating past us. I'd never seen anything like it. I remember the first time I saw an orca, we actually had just gotten to San Juan Island, where we were meeting with several researchers remember we were in downtown Friday Harbor just chatting to the scientists, and they're telling us that, we're just going to wait for the whales to get here. They're not really in town yet. And in the middle of our conversation, maybe like 15, 20 minutes into our conversation, everybody's cell phones went off, and everyone looks down, and they're like, the whales are here. So everyone, as if rushing off to the bat cave, everybody ran over to their boats. And we followed suit, Steve, Linda, and I. And we went down to a dock, and we met up with these researchers from the Center for Whale Research, and started racing out to sea. And I remember the scientists telling us that we were going to try and keep our distance to keep it from bothering the whales too much once we got to them. But the whales began to head straight for our boat, which was a really once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us. They swam right under us, and I got a great shot of them diving down beneath us. So that was the first time I ever saw one of these whales. It was also the first time, of course, that I'd heard the sound of them breathing. It never occurred to me that you'd be able to hear a whale breathe. And for the entire project, for the entire year and a half that we continued working on this, no other shot of an orca was as easy to film as that one. And while that was a very beautiful moment, it turns out that filming enough usable footage of an animal that spends most of its time beneath the surface of the water is way more difficult than you might think. As a matter of fact, in that very same clip that we just watched, you can see a pole in the bottom left-hand side of the photo, and on the end of that pole is a GoPro that Steve is holding. And he's stuck the camera in the water trying to get a cool underwater shot of it. But once he pulls the camera back onto the boat, he realized that he forgot to turn it on. And so that's the difficulty of trying to film the orca, or trying to photograph the orca. So trying to predict exactly when and where an orca will surface essentially amounts to guesswork and luck, just like Steve said. And when it comes to video, you have to add to that a need to keep the camera steady long enough for a usable shot. So when you consider all these things, you might think it's a miracle that we came back with any decent footage at all. And to illustrate that for you, I'd like to share an example of what 99.99% of my video footage looks like. And if you're prone to motion sickness, I'm trying to keep my camera steady while we're on this rocking boat. I'm trying to find that whale that I just saw and disappeared underneath the surface of the water. And I want to guess where it's going to come back up. And your guess is as good as mine. Once I saw Mountain Baker in the background, I really hoped that it would pop up right underneath it, and it really did. But my shot was way too shaky to use in the final footage, so this shot ends up on the cutting room floor. So yeah, we've faced many challenges on this project. In part 4 of the series, we had to come up with a way to document how humans interfere with the orca's ability to hunt and communicate. The way that the humans interfere is through sound and making noise in the ocean. So how do you visually show something that happens underwater and is invisible for most of us? How do you show noise in the Puget Sound? Turns out the answer is with a hydrophone. We met a physicist on San Juan Island by the name of Val Veers, who operates a hydrophone network just off the coast of his home. And these hydrophones are underwater microphones. They're those two things on either end of the pole there that stick up, and they're mounted to a long cylindrical concrete tube mounted on rebar. And the idea for it is that it's heavy enough that once it's underwater, the waves won't knock it around. So this retired physicist, in his 80s, with his wife in her 80s, lifts this large, heavy block of concrete and rebar onto the tiniest dinghy that I've ever seen in my life. And to access this dinghy and the coastline, they come down this very steep, rocky coast from their house. Val's wife is actually using my monopod to get down so that she doesn't fall over. So once we're down there, they've pulled the large, heavy hydrophone onto the boat. Val and his wife paddle all three of us about 100 yards out off the coast to where we can drop the hydrophone. And for nearly the entire 20-minute process, I thought that we were going to capsize at any moment. But we came through unscathed. But I cannot say the same for the next part of the story. So with Val, we learned that the greatest source of noise in the Haro Strait comes from large container ships, like this one, traveling to and from ports in Vancouver, Seattle, and Tacoma. So we decided to go chase one. Steve, Linda, and I hopped on a boat with Joe Gatos from the Sea Dock Society and Rob Williams from the Oceans Initiative, and we went out to see if we could hear and catch one of these large tankers passing through the area. And on that day, I felt like a pirate. We were in a fairly quick boat, but it was still very difficult to catch up to one of these large, massive, massive ships. At a certain point, Steve and I decided to try and send up a drone to see if we could catch it from the air. So what we did was we set the drone down on the back of this small boat that we're on. And remember, we're out in the Sound. It's rocking. It's moving back, and the boat is moving back and forth. And all this motion and all the metal of the boat starts to confuse the drone. So the drone actually starts to take off and then flies into Steve. And it starts spinning its propellers against his leg. And he can't quite get control of it, so he decides to stick his hand down and try to grab it. And he ended up cutting his finger on the propellers. Again, I won't leave these up for too long, but he ended up leaving a little bit of himself on Joe's boat there. But he kept on shooting. That's what it takes when you're out on the water and you only have one chance at these shots. So eventually we gave up on trying to launch the drone this way and decided it would probably be better for me to just launch it by hand. So that's me. I forget if I'm launching or catching the drone, but this ends up being much safer than what we were doing before. So with all of these things that we went through, all of this waiting, all of this trying to keep steady, all of the bleeding that we went through, we were able to build together a story of how sound affects the whales.
Noise is a funny thing. We don't see noise. We don't even hear the noise unless you have a hydrophone in there.
Sound propagates incredibly well underwater. It travels faster than it does in air by a factor of 5, and it is really only spreads out. It doesn't dissipate.
We can estimate the size of the whale's world under quiet conditions and noisy conditions. What we're finding is that even the presence of boats can cause whales that were foraging to stop what they were doing and to travel.
Looking at noise, contaminants, and food availability and showing the relationship with that and what was actually possible, that was a pivotal point in my thinking to really see how important noise and disturbance was.
I wanted to play you this thing that we recorded that is so unusual. This is a sonar from a Canadian naval vessel. This is a pile driver. Now, how would you like to go fishing and hunting while that's going on? The most challenging acoustic task the whales probably have is to hear their own echolocation clicks coming back. And the whale has to hear that weakening sound at a considerable distance. If it's noisy, it's harder for them to do it. Now we have airplanes and noisy ships. We'll see if this system wants to work at all. So That's what it sounds like underwater right now. Now that's very noisy, but that thing's only going to be very noisy for 4 minutes, whereas the big ship puts out energy in the frequency range of the orcas, and that makes it harder for them to communicate for a long period of time. We believe, years of measurements now, that the big ships are the dominant source of underwater noise that limits the ability of the whales to forage and to communicate. They're farther away, but their energy propagates all the way throughout this entire channel.
We're on the west side of San Juan Island, pretty close to the border with Canada. And Rob's got a hydrophone in the water right now. We're just hearing a real low thunk, 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 thunk.
We're hearing the propellers of a distant ship. In fact, it's so distant, I actually can't see which ship is necessarily making the sound.
And as you said, that low frequency sound that we're hearing, ka-tunk, 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 that's the one that interferes with killer whales being able to communicate over long distance.
Yes. And there it is, coming around the corner.
Right. Wow, that's a long way off. It's a massive container ship. It's got so many containers on the top, it looks like a small city.
There are a lot of natural, but also human-caused sounds in the ocean. These whales are communicating over 8-10 kilometers, coordinating their group movements over that kind of spatial scale. When it gets noisy in here, and it gets noisy in here a lot from ships and small boats and lots of other activities, the sounds just physically cannot be detected over background noise. Noise is a problem because lack of Chinook is a problem. If the whales have given up all that they have to give, and we're making it hard for them to find the salmon that are left, then they just have kind of run out of options. If you could somehow wave a magic wand, like we all want to do, and get us back to Chinook salmon numbers that we haven't seen since the 70s or 80s, these whales would do just fine. If you can't do that, if you could somehow reduce noise and disturbance to improve the whale's foraging efficiency just a little bit, so that they could catch just a few more of the Chinook that are left, you can help the population recover a little bit faster.
It takes a long time to get Chinook back. 4 years, maybe even 7 years for the big 100-pounders or something like that. It doesn't take a lot of time to slow a boat down. This is something that we can do right away that could give them a leg up.
So, like I said, it was amazing to be able to work with Steve and Linda to tell the story of these local orcas. But this is just one of the many different types of stories that we tell on our small but mighty video team at the Seattle Times. Among them in the past year, Lauren Frone and Bettina Hansen have worked on covering the missing and murdered indigenous women's movement here in Washington State. And Corinne Chin and Erica Schultz have been churning out stories from their reporting in Mexico on immigration, what happens beyond the border. And to share with you a small taste of all these different types of stories that we do, we made a short reel for you all to watch.
What you think about me is not any of my business. That's your thought about who you think I am. But let me show you who I am for real.
When we come from the lifestyle that I come from, you don't think that you have all these skills or these qualities in you. All these things that people can label me, it is not who I am today.
Sentíamos el miedo. Y por ese motivo nosotros decidimos correr a tierras americanas, pedir una ayuda, un asilo, ¿verdad? El oficial que nos entrevistó, él se nos adelantó con las palabras, dijo que esos cuentos ya se los podía él.
When I'm in the ring, I feel like I'm a goddess.
My art just got louder. I felt that I really needed to create.
Noise is a problem because lack of Chinook is a problem. If the whales have given up all that they have to give, and we're making it hard for them to find the salmon that are left, they just have kind of run out of options.
There used to be kind of a certain romance to it. And the idea that you could make a fortune, or you could make nothing, or you could die.
My story, it's universal. And so it made me see that I wasn't alone. Say her name! Sheila Pearl Lewis! Say her name! Celeste Spencer! Gone but never forgotten.
When my sister was found, it was a relief, but at the same time it was like, I know I'm never gonna see her again. This isn't something that you just sweep under the rug and people are gonna forget about it. It's real, and the heartache's real, the pain, the loss, the wondering, that's all real.
There's so many people that are affected by the immigration laws that we have in place, and they're permanently displaced from their families. They don't have a chance to live together unless they make this difficult decision.
Le digo yo a mi hijo, ahí está tu país, solo lo miramos. Y a veces digo, tan cerca y tan lejos. Porque él tiene, como todo estadounidense, él tiene sus derechos.
I was born here, but not being accepted by Americans as an American really bothered me. We are part of American history. Every group of people coming from different countries, they are part of this history.
It's definitely given me more hope working with this movement. Determination to keep fighting, to find answers.
We will lead, not only here in Seattle, we will lead the state, and we will show the rest of this country the way that it should be done.
I'd like to introduce Dean RUTZ. Dean has been on staff at the Seattle Times for 31 years. He grew up in Illinois and has been a writer, editor, and photographer since he was 15. He attended Indiana University, which, side note, I went there also. Dean and I met there as students, and we now have a long history of working together between the university and the last 30 years at the Seattle Times. Dean has covered a little bit of everything, but has always excelled as a sports photographer. He's traveled far and wide, covering 9 Olympics as an editor or photographer. He's been to the NBA Finals with Michael Jordan, shot countless Huskies, Mariners, and Seahawks games, as well as 3 Super Bowls and the Sounders MLS Cup championship last fall. As the Seattle area has become more successful on the national stage over the years, Dean's participation has grown right along with it. I can honestly say he was great to begin with, but he just keeps getting better and better. Dean RUTZ.
Thanks, Angie. It should be noted that Angie is, in her own right, a great photographer, and she made, when we were in Indiana, one of the most famous photographs of basketball coach Bobby Knight that was ever captured, which I would like to reenact for you now by throwing a chair across the floor. I don't think the library would appreciate that, but sports fans know the picture that I'm referencing. 2019 was the most fun I think I've ever had as a photographer at the Times because all the teams were great, all the teams were interesting. And when we were trying to edit down the show tonight, we just had to throw things away. There was just no idea where to start or where to end. So we're going to try and do a few little highlights. And where do you start? Well, you start off with the fact that sports photography is a really expensive gig. And I really want to give my editors a lot of credit because the amount of money they spend on the cameras or on the lights that we carry all the time just to try to put you into the middle of the action, this is not a cheap endeavor. And it's all designed to kind of make it appear as if, you're in the middle of the action, which is, what the goal is. And sometimes it's because we're in the middle of the action, whether we liked it or not, hoping Jay Bruce will, catch this pop foul and not hit me in the head. Or, in the case of Oregon, I credit myself with the tackle on the end zone. The Huskies didn't get it. But wherever you are in sports, you're out there with 100 of your best friends, and the most embarrassing thing about sports is that when you get beat 100 times over. You know, you get your nose rubbed in it 100 times over. So it can be a very frustrating thing to do. So what do we do when we're going to talk about sports? Well, let's go back to right to the beginning of the year, spring training. I arrived down in Peoria last year, really not even knowing where I wanted what I wanted to do for stories. But I knew that there were a couple of things that were going to be really key. Certainly Ichiro. We knew that his retirement was imminent, but we didn't really know where. And we didn't really know how spring training was going to quite play out. There was also, Yusei Kikuchi, who is the Japanese firebrand. You know, he's going to make his first start as a rookie. And that was going to be a big story. Felix, you know, Felix was expected to retire, but, you know, nobody really was committing to much of anything. You had a lot of these rookies coming in, or just, you know, a lot of the trades, like, you know, Malik Smith, who came in from Tampa. He was great. He let me kind of set some lights around him and just kind of do some stuff. Dylan Moore was another one of those rookies that were guaranteed to contribute. And you had this whole bunch of nobodies, and, you know, very few of them actually kind of finished out the season. So spring training was kind of a weird story. As no sooner had we finished up spring training where it was on to Tokyo. That was going to be the big event. It was going to be Ichiro's retirement. Or at least we expected his retirement. Nobody was committing to much of anything. And I got off the plane in Narita, and literally the first face that I saw was Ichiro. You see it as you're coming off the jetway at Narita, and there are the ads for the bank. Ichiro's selling the bank, he's selling the cosmetics, he's selling everything. He's on billboards everywhere, he's in the grocery store. And you kind of began to realize that this was going to be a bigger story than perhaps we were prepared to do. So I went down to the Tokyo Dome after I kind of got over the jet lag, and I'm hauling all my cameras in a shipping case behind me just to kind of get a little bit of the lay of the land, realizing right away, I don't speak the language. And there's not a lot of information coming down to me as to what we're going to do. And so I'm assuming that, you know, there's nothing vulgar on that side, but I really don't know. So you kind of shoot stuff, and you ask some of the fans to kind of help you along a little bit, but, you know, as you're going to all the photo meetings, you realize they're all being conducted in Japanese. And all the information that's coming down is coming down to the sports writers, and one of the great fallacies is that, oh yeah, they'll share it with the photographer. I didn't know anything that was going on at all. And so I'm dragging my case around on the field, and Mariners Vice President of Communications, Tim Heffley, comes up and said, "Dean, you coming to the press conference?" And I'm like, "What press conference? What are we doing?" He said, "Come on, you can follow me." And so we jump into the hallway, and then all of a sudden Ichiro, Service, and Kikuchi show up. And I'm dragging this case of cameras thinking, I really should be shooting this, shouldn't I? So I tried to run ahead, open up the case, put a couple of cameras together, shoot something down the hallway, run ahead, try and get into the press conference room where Ichiro was kind of, you know, peering around the corner, kind of see what was going on, kind of playing with the Japanese media, which was there by the hundreds. And they gave all the reporters headsets for the translations. They didn't give the photographers anything, because there were only 2 Americans covering it, me and USA Today. So when they announced, oh, we're going to have a photo op at the front of the stage, whoosh, you see all this rush of photographers up there, and I'm in the back of the room saying, "Excuse me, what are we doing?" So I was kind of behind the 8 ball from the moment that I got there, and I realized really quickly that what MLB had set up for us was not going to really work for me. They had kind of put, there was only USA 2, there was only 2 of us, so. But there were, you know, this is my position on third base. There were 30 or 40 Japanese photographers inside of me, and then the Mariners' well was behind that, so you couldn't really see anything. And when the team would come up to the baseline, they all had their backs to us, and this was just kind of a problem for me. I shot for a couple of days just trying to kind of capture some general pictures of Ichiro and how important he was to the Japanese crowd. But I went to John Blundell at Major League Baseball on the 4th game, which was definitely, this is the day that he's going to retire, and said, "John, this isn't working for me. I need another position." And so he put me over on first, which I had asked for, and I said, "I need one more favor. I have to be on the field. I'm tired of seeing his back for 4 days. I need to see his face. I need to see Ichiro when his country's anthem plays for him one final time." And to my surprise, MLB kind of gave me the opportunity to go out on the field briefly in front of the team, shoot a few photographs where I could at least kind of, you know, capture that gray hair and that sense of this famous retiring Japanese player. And then I settled in on this last game on the first base side, thinking, I think this is going to work for me, but I wasn't really sure. Feel this stress, you know, there's 40 TV cameras in the stadium, I'm kind of working alone, but the angle worked out fine because I knew that I could kind of come up the left or the right field line a little bit, kind of get Ichiro as he finally turned and saluted the fans, and that from my angle I could kind of turn around and see into the Mariner dugout as he was coming back, saluting the crowd first, and then the team would come out and greet him. And that would give me an opportunity to see some stuff that nobody over on the third base line was going to be able to see. And it gave me a clear view into the well when Griffey came up and gave him a great big hug. That was terrific. And so I was madly filing pictures because, you know, this was a big story back home. And word came down that there was going to be a post-game press conference. There were going to be two of them. One was back in that same hotel that I didn't know how to get to because I'd followed them through the tunnels. But there was going to be another one where Ichiro was just going to talk to the local press. And we're not allowed in the clubhouse. Reporters, you know, that's what they do. They're in the clubhouse, they interview the players. Photographers never go in the clubhouse. I've never been in, don't know what it looks like, don't know where it is. And I wrote Tim Heavley and said, can I come? This sounds like a big announcement. He said, locals only, clubhouse, be there. So I thought, great, I'm filing this stuff, and I'm thinking, I really don't know where to go. And so I asked one of the guys from Major League Baseball, what do you think I should do? And he said, well, you know, you go down the steps of the clubhouse there and just go down the hallway, but they'll never let you in. Why? Well, they don't let photographers in. Well, they told me I could go. And he said, no, they're not going to let you in. And I said, well, what do you think I should do? And he thinks about it for a second and says, you're going to have to run for it. Well, it seemed like a great idea at the time. And so that's what I did. I ran across the field, down the stairs, through the hallway, and then all of a sudden I was in the locker room. And service kind of does one of these things, and a couple of players look at me like, who are you? And you have this brief moment before the panic sets in where you realize there's nobody else here but me. There's no photographers and no reporters. I'm not supposed to be here, am I? And then Tim comes out, screams at me, throws me out back onto the field. I came running around the hallways and trying to find, you know, where I was supposed to be. Found the gaggle of reporters. Of course the reporters knew where they were supposed to be, but I was the only photographer or any cameraman that was doing anything with that. Shot the press conference. I'm going to run out the door, go back to the hotel for the big press conference, and just as I'm running out, I hear Ben Van Houten, the team photographer, saying he's heading back out. And I just kind of like stopped in my tracks and I said, what do you mean, who's heading back out? And he said, Ichiro. I thought, oh, okay. So we run back down the hallway, run out to the field, and you see 50,000 people haven't left the stadium yet. And on the in front of the Mariner dugout, there's maybe 60, 70, 80 reporters and photographers. They're all standing there, and they're looking at me, because, you know, I'm just coming out of the clubhouse, and they're looking at me, and they're doing like this. And I said, well, I kind of pointed to the door, and I said, now, and almost on cue. The timing was perfect. I had just come out, and Ichiro was just coming out of the clubhouse to take a lap around the outfield. And there were maybe 30 or 40 photographers in pursuit, falling down on their, as they were backpedaling, and it was kind of an ugly scene for a little while there. And you're trying to make photographs where, you know, we're not the picture, Ichiro is the picture. But it became impossible to escape the scrum until about at this point, we're on the third baseline, and Ben Van Houten stops everybody, says, stop, everybody stop, right here on the baseline, this is for him. And at that moment, everybody kind of understood Ichiro would go out onto the field alone, out into the middle of the field, without any escorts, without any photographers, and just say one final farewell to the crowd, which became the basis of our poster page. So that was a lucky break. But after that, there wasn't a lot to cheer for the Mariners until you really got down to, Felix's farewell. And that was his last start of the season. And it was kind of a big deal, but Felix had wanted to go out and spend time out in left field with the King's Court. And they said, no, you're going to have to make your regular start. So he came into the dugout, he kind of avoided a lot of that stuff, and it was unfortunately just kind of, you know, what it was for Felix. It wasn't a very good game. He was kind of getting shelled. And you're making these photographs knowing nobody's going to care tomorrow about whether he won the game or lost the game. You know, so you're kind of sneaking pictures in the dugout here or there, but it's going to be about, first of all, the overwhelming turnout for him, but it's also going to be about his farewell. And like everything else, you're trying to decide, where do you want to be? There's 40 TV cameras, I'm alone. The advantage here being it was in English, and it was a stadium I knew. So I put myself over on the Mariner team dugout side, and that worked out fairly well for me. Unlike Japan, I kind of surmised that being next to the Mariners dugout would make more sense because the team would come out to him and that he would have to leave them. He would have to kind of walk toward me, and then whatever would happen would be between me and them. And it just turned out that he would kind of stop, salute the crowd, take his bow, and all this would be not obstructed. You wouldn't see other players. You wouldn't see any other cameramen. You would be able to also kind of look into the Mariners dugout as well. After the game, Felix came back out. It was just like Ichiro. Everybody was still in the stands. him to say goodbye one more time personally. And so he ran down the left field line, jumped up on top of the outfield wall, and just kind of hit this pose for us, saying like, "Here I am, boys, this is it." And it was just, kind of a vintage kind of Felix moment where, he allowed the adoration to just kind of wash over him. You had people grabbing him. This woman pulled him out, kissed him on the cheek. I'm sure he doesn't even remember it because there were just so many people that were kind of pawing at him. And one of the things that we try to do sometimes, it's very hard when you're doing photography. You have to remind yourself, turn around, see what else is going on around you. And I would turn around and I would see his teammates stopping to applaud for him. And so you're just trying to take in as many different views as you can. So that worked out great. But if we're talking about sports stories, there were so many others that I could just briefly glance on. Hey, let's talk about Washington women's softball. Return visit to the World Series. And for me, Washington softball, it's one of those great sports because they play the game with so much passion. They wear their heart on the sleeves, whether they're winning or whether they're losing. And when they got eliminated by UCLA, they got swept at Oklahoma City in straight games. You had kind of one of those nice little pictures where you had Gabby Plain on the left. She's the pitcher of the future, and Taryn Alvelo, the graduating senior, and the disappointment, but also the optimism for that program. That was fantastic. Let's not forget the Storm was coming off a winning season too, with a championship game, and the first game of the year, of course, was the ring ceremony, which was fantastic. They were all having a great time kind of showing off the rings. But a lot of that optimism faded with the first team introduction, and you see players coming out in walking boots, or you see that Sue Bird's going to be on the bench. She's not going to play this year. Or you see Dan Hughes, coach who was fighting cancer. This was going to be a little bit of a different season. And it was still a great season because you had players, like Jewel Lloyd, who had an MVP season. She was fantastic, played up and down the floor, from above, whatever. You had Jordan Canada, who, because Sue Bird was going to sit, she was going to have an opportunity to play. And you're a baller when Slickwack says, "I want your autograph." So what else we got here? There was also Husky football, which was just maddening in some respects because who knew at the outset that Chris Peterson was going to resign? He didn't know it. None of us knew it. One of my, Peterson's always great for a photograph, and one of my favorites was against USC. This is center Nick Harris was dancing a jig when Salvan Ahmed ran the ball back 89 yards for a touchdown. He's sitting out there dancing, and coach comes up and says, "Hey, knucklehead, you're in the next play, and you got to go 89 yards down to the end zone." It was kind of fortuitous that at the Apple Cup I stopped to shoot Jimmy Lake because he didn't know, I didn't know, I don't think Peterson knew that he was going to become the head coach 24 hours later. And I'd gone through a lot of my old photographs of the coach's handshake, what happens at the end of the game. And it did seem like a lot of Coach Peterson's expressions were pained. He didn't seem, if you really looked at him as a collection, it didn't seem like he was enjoying himself. But then when the Apple Cup came, there was that sort of relief. And then when you got to the Las Vegas Bowl, a whole total different guy was out there. He was loose, he was fun. He was still very focused, of course. I kind of ran out on the field, again, one of those things you're not supposed to do, but it's the last time he's going to be coach. I need to see this, so I ran out on the field where he was talking to the Boise State coach, guy he had known and recruited. And you just saw this sort of life kind of come back to him. And again, in the pregame stuff, very focused, very disciplined, but not the least bit of stress on his face at all. He was still focused on the sideline. In the last 30 seconds of the game, the players are celebrating and he's still in the game. And you're looking for those little juxtapositions between him and incoming coach Jimmy Lake, which is great. And you kind of shoot this stuff and you always kind of know what you've got. So when my boss, Fred Nelson, texts me and says, "I need you to drop everything and get A1 right now," I was like, "I don't really have anything." "No, I need it right now. I need it right now. I'd like to shoot trophy." I told Fred I want to shoot trophy, and he said, "No, don't shoot trophy. We need it right now." And so I did what all good photographers did. I ignored him. You do that at your own peril. You do that at your own peril, but you know what you've got, and you know what you're looking for, and it just, you're just saying, "Please, please, 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 let something emerge." And within a couple of minutes, something did emerge, which was, the ideal photograph for me, which was Jimmy Lake Chris Peterson looking opposite directions, both holding the trophy, ingoing, outgoing. For me, that was perfect. That was the type of picture that I was looking for. You know, let's not forget the Sounders won a title this year. Yeah, applaud the Sounders. But the thing is, I've never gotten to shoot a title game with the Sounders. The 2 times that they have played, you know, I was on the road with the Seahawks or the Huskies. I never got to do a title match. So I was really thrilled to actually be able to shoot the game at CenturyLink Field. You know, Major League Soccer was really happy to have that. You had 69,000 people, one of the most successful franchises in MLS Cup, winning the title. That was what they wanted to see, and certainly what we wanted to see as well. So that, you know, that's a lot of the top of the stuff. Now you kind of have to finish off with the Seahawks because, you know, Seahawks are the Seahawks. And we always start off the year where I tried to make a portrait of players. And I was over at the VMAC, and I was going to get Russell Wilson, KJ Wright, and Bobby Wagner for a picture. And so I kind of set up my lights, really didn't know what I was going to do. But from where I was at the VMAC, they had the doors open out to the practice field. And I could see the guys were practicing, and then all of a sudden, the 3 guys are walking to me. And they're in their shorts, they're not really in dress uniform, which is not what I was expecting. I'm thinking, this may not go real well. And Russell Wilson comes in, and he just kind of sits down on the bench, and he's hunched over, he's dripping sweat, drinking water. And I'm thinking, oh, what do I do? So I said, you know, Russ, thank you for doing this. I know this is the last thing you want to do right now. And he just kind of lifts up his head and takes a swig of water and says, just be fast. And so that's what I was, 10 frames, that's all I shot. I put him, KJ, and Bobby out onto the field and let KJ and Bobby figure out how they wanted to pose together. And then I said, well, what do you guys want to do? You want to do something else yourself? And Russell says, yeah, let's just do something fun of the 3 of us together. So the 3 of them get together. I got Russell in the middle, the defensive backs on the side. And Russell kind of looks up at KJ and says, dude, you are big. And KJ is up here on Russ, and Bobby says, yeah, you know, have we ever stood together? I don't think so. You're huge. And so you'd see, you know, I'd try to start making the picture, and Russ would start doing this thing. He'd start jumping up, trying to get up a little higher. And finally, Bobby calls it and says, no, you have to go on the other side. You're just going to have to put KJ in the middle and just forget it. And so that's what we ended up doing. You know, you see the guns on Wilson. It was a terrific little picture, and that became our special section lead. And they took that other picture and kind of put that into the inside. The reason I like going to things like spring training and doing these portraits is that you get to meet the players. They don't know who I am. They don't really care who I am, but they know they've seen me before. And when you're a pro athlete, it doesn't matter whether it's a practice or it's a game, there are a lot of cameras around you, and you are very suspicious, especially of unguarded moments. And so we kind of got to this point where they don't know who I am, they don't know my name, but they know I'm harmless, I guess. And so on the first game of the year, I was just doing some pictures of Coach Pete and Russell's wife, Ciara, and, you know, a picture of Sienna, their youngest child. And, you know, they kind of looked at me and they just kind of like, whatever, he's harmless. We know this guy. But because I'm down at knee level, I'm perfect size for little hands. And so she came over and just kind of crawled into my lap and wanted to learn how the camera worked. And so we started taking some pictures together, and Russell was kind of over on the sideline, so I kind of helped her point the camera at him and shoot. There's Daddy, go ahead and shoot some pictures, and she would giggle as the frames would kind of click off, and then Ciara would kind of come over and say, oh, honey, he's working. It's like, no, this is great. This is as much fun for me as it is for anybody else. The thing about football, I know I'm rushing through this, I apologize, but there's a lot of ground to cover. The thing about football is it's a different discipline than a lot of other aspects of photography. We shoot thousands of frames, and football's the worst. You're shooting 3,000, 4,000 frames, and you're just kind of covering the from beginning to end, and it gets a little worse. You know, I noticed that my grip, Robert, who carries a couple of my cameras, I carry a couple of cameras, and I'm editing through this take, and then all of a sudden, I noticed that as I'm editing through the take, all of a sudden these blank frames start to show up, then pictures of the ground, and then pictures of nothing, and then hundreds of frames, just kind of blank frames, show up in your take, and it's like, oh great, I got to go through this all too. But the thing is about football, you kind of know what you're looking for. You can shoot 3,000 pictures, but when DK Metcalf gets his first pro catch, and it's a good catch, you can spin right through 3,000 frames. I know what I'm looking for. I know where it is in the game, and you just kind of go grab that, and that, you know, the editors kind of can see that too, and that becomes like a special section picture for us. The thing that it's hard to get used to, I think, in football, is how much ground they cover and how quickly it happens. And And when we were kind of editing this down, we kind of went to memorable plays. What were the memorable plays of the year? And they're only memorable if you get them. If you don't get them, it's memorable for another reason. But let's take one of the biggest plays of the year, which was that crazy Tyler Lockett catch against the Rams. And we kind of shoot in the end zones because the sidelines are so cluttered anymore, you can't be there. So I was running downfield with my grip. I had the 600 that Steve had defiled. I had that in one hand. And I had that 7200 in the other hand. And I'm running down the field when Russ kind of spins left. I'm just kind of behind the Rams bench. And so I just, with one hand, because I don't have my hands free, just kind of pop one frame and then just kind of spin to the corner where the ball's going and just 1, 2, 3, that's all I'm going to get. And it was a great shot. Well, it's not that great. But my grip, Robert, comes up running behind me. He's all excited because he's seen the touchdown. Did you get it? Did you get it? And I said, I really don't know. So we kind of spin the camera and said, hey, we actually got that. And he said, I never thought you'd get that picture. And he says, well, the thing is, when you get these sort of pictures, there's no sense of accomplishment. It's sense of relief. I didn't screw up. They expect you to get those pictures. How often I get them? I don't get them as much as I really should be getting them. Let's talk about DK Metcalf's first touchdown catch in Pittsburgh. One of the bigger mistakes everybody makes, photographers, whether you're pro or am, is you kind of shoot that picture and you stop shooting. And you need to tell yourself, keep shooting, keep going through, because you don't really know, especially in sports, how this is going to play out. What you think is the picture rarely ever is. So you kind of have to shoot through the sequence because, your first frame, you expect it to be the catch. Okay, that's what's the catch. But then all of a sudden that ball is still airborne and you have to kind of keep shooting through that thing because I don't know if he's going to catch it or not. If he catches it, boy, is it going to be great. If he doesn't catch it, it's not running in the paper at all. But he did catch it. It was a great little touchdown. Fantastic. You talk about impact players in terms of great plays this year. Jadeveon Clowney was definitely a lot of fun to watch this year. A great personality, great smile. This was the day they had acquired him, first game from the Houston Texans. And I was just like, oh, this is great. This just opened up perfectly. The big smile, the stadium, a really great portrait. But right away, he made his impact known on that Monday Night Football game. The funny thing is when, I tend to shoot really, really, really tight. Thank you, Mike Gurley, for the 600. But I didn't see the ball pop out. I saw Jaron Reed coming up on the side, and he's going to hit Garoppolo. Great, this is going to be the picture. I don't see the ball pop out for like 2 or 3 frames. And then suddenly, me and Jaron Reed's eyes get really big. And that ball's on the ground, and Clowney's already gone past, and he has to double back, pick that ball up, and scoot back in for the touchdown. Just, a terrific little sequence. Back to DK Metcalf. He, you got into the playoffs. He kind of single-handedly, if you want to go down to it, saved that game in Philadelphia because they were 3rd and 10 on their own goal line pretty much, and they hadn't been converting third downs much at all. And so, of course, what does Russell Wilson do on 3rd and 10? He goes for like 40 yards. That was a brilliant call. It was a lucky picture because I was kind of expecting Wilson to get sacked. I was behind the line with a short lens. So I turned, he's open in the field, so I turn around and get that picture. Hey, that's great, that makes for a nice cover. But that's not really what the view is. That's kind of what the view is. I'm really, really loose. Thank you again, Mike Gurley, for the high-resolution cameras, because you can actually crop into these things and kind of pull these moments out if you can actually see them. There were a lot of great stories. Obviously, Marshawn was a lot of fun this year, even though he played just 3 games. But he had that great hair, and he had that great attitude that, I'm going over the top of the pile. You watch a lot of these running backs, they go to the side, they look for the weak spot. Nah, I'm going through you. And that sort of attitude kind of energized the team. It's really energized the players, the coaches, and it was a lot of fun to watch. It just didn't hold up. Pretty much you come down to that game against San Francisco and the last regular season game, and that's, pretty much how their season ended. Was that holding against Hollister in the end zone? Yeah, probably. Did he get in the end zone on that last catch? I don't really know. But what I do know is that because of that loss, we pretty much ended our season in the snow in Green Bay. This is Mike Siegel, my colleague on the left, me, my nephew Daniel, who is one of my grips, Robert Buchmeyer, who is one of my grips, cell phone picture made by my boss, Danny Galowski, and I want to thank those guys, and I want to thank my editors too, because in 31 years, I have never had more fun. As a sports photographer, as a photographer at all, it was just so great. There's a lot more pictures I could show, I could spend all night talking about them because it was fun. And will we, have a season like that again this year? I don't know, but spring training does start in 2 weeks. There's so many pictures. This was an unusual year for me. Not a lot got away, but at the end of the season, for some reason, the strange thing about the Seahawks, if you looked at like those big catches that Russell had, very consistently, they were to the visitors' corner. They weren't to the Seahawks corner. I don't know why that was. So Mike and I were switching every week, and so Mike would get that picture in that corner, and the next week I would get that picture. They were pretty consistently there. Way too much gets away, and I'd rather not talk about those pictures too much. Like I say, you get embarrassed 99 times by the other guys that are there.
I'm not going to say much about the ones that got away, but I always blame it on the fact that Dean gets all the really good camera gear with the really fast motor drives.
Thank you, Mike Gurley.
And I don't.
If I heard you right, you're asking about how do you pick the one picture when you shot 4,000. It comes down to the big plays. That's really what it is. If you win the game on that fantastic catch by Tyler Lockett in the end zone, well, there's one that you're going to want. And then after that, you kind of go through the stats at the end of the game and see who did what during the game. But memorable plays, you do remember them, and you can expedite through 3,000 pictures very, very quickly. I always shoot the clock after every play, so I know where I am in the game. And so if I know a play happened here, go right to that play and pull that picture out. Thank you.